Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Eerie Hour with Erich. For those who wish to hear tales of the strange, the macabre, and various urban legends, you have come to the right place. Tonight, join us around the fire as Erich reads a spine-tingling tale for your entertainment.
Prepare to be scared, for this is
Eerie Hour with Erich. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here is your host, Erich.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Eerie Hour with Erich. I'm your host, Erich Davies, and welcome to another episode that takes place here, around my fire, with my light, my scary story, and of course, my ever-faithful cameraman, who may or may not be a descendant of the late, great Vincent Price. And we also have two special guests with us tonight. Would they like to introduce themselves? No, they don't. Well, okay. They introduce themselves that way, but I like it. And yes, as always, we are practicing social distancing, so don't worry, folks. Tonight's tale, we examine of a rather peculiar nature, the supposed origins of the planet we live on. This has been debated for quite some time by scholars young and old and of various different backgrounds. Some support the theory of evolution proposed by Darwin and natural selection. Others propose the creationism with it being according to what was written in the Bible. But could there be another theory, possibly, to how the Earth originated? Well then, this tale is actually an incomplete recollection from a man known only as Arnold Sanders, who was incarcerated at Penhurst Asylum. He recounts his time when he saw a Harvard professor give a lecture on supposed beings from otherworldly places, should we say. And that, folks, is tonight's tale. As always, I'm not blind as a bat, but I still do need glasses so I can read. There we are. I get my ghost light closer. Yes, it's very hard to read in the dark, folks. Or would you prefer that? Oh, and also, before I go on, thank you so much to those that have liked my page. Feel free to tell your friends, co-workers, family, and anybody else whom you interact with on a daily basis about this show. And also, we are halfway through Season 1 of this show. We are on Episode 5, and we plan to do another few episodes after this. And after Episode 10 is the end of Season 1. Because in Season 2, in about a few weeks' time after that, we plan to move from Facebook to YouTube. So hopefully we can do that. Anyway, just wanted to get that out of the way. And tonight's tale was written by a good friend of mine, Mr. Francisco Frank Gonzalez. And it's titled The Curse of Nekrakhon. Oh, and also, if Mr. Frank is watching this, I am sorry if I mispronounce some words. There is nothing more serene in this life than the assurance of one's existence. We look up to the sky and see the hues of blue, as is the same when we stare at the ocean. For God resides above the clouds, and the devil purge beneath the deep. As a child, I was once pandered by my father when I helped him to dig a well. I asked what happens if we dig too deep. My father sneered and snickered. We might end up poking the devil in the head. I now forlorn those notions, as it was much simpler. To believe in the devil has become counterintuitive into our modern psyche. But what else is there to fear? My colleagues in Europe are certain the subconscious can give us those answers. I've heard of another one, an entity I wish I had never learned of. The beastly miscreation that makes me wish I still believed in the devil. For it was much more comforting to have satanic notions. The fallen on was merely a counterpoint to the goodness of God. A scheming mischief maker who pushes man to do ill will against his own imbued divinity. To have something far more frightening, a true monster in our midst, is not for the mind of man. We only fear the demons of old because they were rationalizations of real threats. Sharp-toothed, hairy beasts lurking the dark were indeed coded representations of the wolves, bears, and large cats our ancestors justifiably feared. It was only to scare the young who were more ambitious to leave the sanctum of the tribal grounds. In later years, we can all wipe the sweat from our foreheads and know how we too must implement these fears to assure our children that they must remain in bed. It is only in our formidable years that we expect ourselves to only fear our own mortality. Beyond such notions is inconceivable. Now, I will share with you the truths that have led me to a shattered worldview. A decade ago, I had attended the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. One evening, a series of professors were to speak before the public on their scientific findings. It was a prodigious moment for a man of my standing, as I had studied anthropology and hoped to help unlock the secrets of man's past. One of the first to lecture that evening was John Harrod of Harvard. I was both elated and intrigued to hear the findings of this learned man. No one else in the states and territories of America had shaken the foundations of many faiths. Harrod was a student of Darwin and was certain everything recounted in biblical history was a farce. The minutes from his last lecture read as such: "Indeed, man has recorded the events of possible occurrences in early human history. Ingrained in man's head were the true events of real cataclysms, such as supervolcanoes destroying the whole masses of Earth, or major shifts in its geological nature. However, his mind was not developed to a level which he could discern these events. Instead, he fabled and yarned about what had caused them. Early on, they defied these forces of nature, as we saw in a microcosmic scale among the natives who once occupied our civilized state. Soon, the man saw himself in the image of the gods, beings of grander nature whose judgment was masking the will of greedy tribal chieftains and early kings. Now that man is fully aware of his own self and the world around him, he no longer needs these imaginary manifestations. He built great temples and monuments to gods. Now he deserves to do so for himself. We glorious beings have honed earthen materials to bring our nation to heights of profound success, linking our continent by rail and telegraph, and ripping the seas with our ocean-going vessels. We can move farther and greater without the need of fearing the Almighty. For once he was reputed for splitting the Red Sea and tumbling the walls of Jericho. Now man blows up mountains and streams, valuable materials from mines. We are gods, only if we allow ourselves to achieve our mental paramounts, which will catapult us away from the control of backwards religions." As I recall, the crowds didn't know what to make of his claims, but people were intrigued. His ideas fared far better in Europe, but the United States was still steeped in godly notions. How else could we justify our destiny as a grand republic? To totally absorb Harrod's ideas could plague our society with the likes of robber barons and political charlatans. Still, I eagerly awaited his presence at the exposition along with several other scientists from around the world. The crowd was given an opening address to where the main attendant called for Mr. Harrod to walk on stage. I was shocked by the sight of this man. His clothes were all wrinkled, and his face appeared to be covered in soot. He had grown a full beard, which was matted and unkempt. His hair was wavy and overgrown at the back. I could hear the crowd whispering among themselves, and I was now worried that this was to become a fiasco over his mere facade. Harrod limped and was helped on stage, where he ravenously smoked a cigar, looking back to the crowd with a wide-eyed glare. At the podium, he cleared his throat and flicked his cigar to the side, starting by saying, "I have never been afraid in my whole life. I was a precocious child who always questioned everything, because I resolved myself to trust no one. My father was a drunkard. He lied to my mother every night and told her he would be back before supper. So if I couldn't trust my father, how could I trust anyone else? Now, I can barely trust my own judgment, my eyes, my ears, even my own words." He paused for a moment as the crowd remained silent. I felt like we all had the same concerns. Perhaps he was ready to admit some shortcoming, only to have it explain his own mental resilience. Yes, it was only an act to lead then to a profound statement. Still, nothing else was said for a good 10 minutes, when Herrick recomposed himself. His eyes were swelling in tears. As his hand shook at the podium, he looked up to the ceiling of the building hall, then jerked his head back to the crowd, shouting, "I cannot even start by explaining what I have seen." The crowd gasped, and Herrick yelled again. "For many nights before this evening, I had made attempts to continue my lecture as I had penned, yet how could I? For if only you had seen what I had seen, the ghastly aberrations that now pollute my brain cells, and the stenches that still linger in my nostrils." I heard one man next to me murmur, "Has he been drinking?" Another me in the back said out loud, "This must be some terrible joke." Others started to laugh, and Herrick began raving. "No one can look at the night sky with any semblance of sanity after you all hear what I'm about to say. Nor will you look at the ocean without the horrid realization of what really is dwelling in the deepest bowels of Earth's crevices and trenches." The crowd's laughter turned into a roar, and Herrick became even more erratic. "You will all see, and you will scream. No, you will cry. Cry and scream once you hear about it. For it's kept up every single night this week. Oh my God, help us all!" I stood up, walking past the jeering faces as I saw John Herrod being escorted off the stage, while the next professor in line tried to hush the crowd to silence. I followed the shouting, then continued down the hallway. It came to a stop at an office where John Herrod was on the ground, breathing heavily. One of the men held his fist, obviously after having struck him a blow to calm him down. Herrod raised his head and locked eyes with me. One of the men turned and asked, "Do you think you can talk to him?" I nodded, and stepped inside the room while the others hastily exited. I looked down at the man I had idolized, shocked but dismayed at his current state. I laid my hand on his shoulder and asked if he'd like a drink, to which he refused. "There's not enough alcohol in all the distilleries of the world to assuade me of the images implanted in my head." He raised himself by grabbing onto my arms, where I then directed him to a nearby chair. He took several deep breaths and then knocked his head back, sighing but moaning aloud before saying, "I know everyone has now taken me for a lunatic." He swung his head forward and said hastily, "I am on the edge of sanity as my mind is being raped by one that is near, the one who is tearing away the very fabric of our known world." I assured him, particularly in bargaining, that he only needed to take time off for himself, perhaps for a month. He then said in a fervent manner, "Oh, but I am planning something, not for myself, but I will have to venture beyond the civilized world. There are secrets buried in the jungles and deserts in Earth's most remote corners. There I will amass proof that this great conspiracy I hope to unveil tonight is indeed true." He calmed himself, biting on his fingernails. "Perhaps that was my error. After all, I am being a hypocrite, After years of lambasting those who claim to see only the visages of angels and demons, now I too was ready to make claims without evidence. That is what I plan to do. Travel and retrieve the artifacts that will explain my next hypothesis. I will unveil to the world. I was confused, but asked him what he needed to prove. He became pale in complexion, and he said in a grunting, loud voice, "Nekrakhon is near." I would have insulted my own intelligence by not asking, but oh, how I wish I still wrote it anyway. Maybe because my respect for John Herod forbade me from standing up and walking away laughing like the others. It could have elicited such a feeling, but it was the way he said it was diminished in any notions. Even if I was able to, I could not spell the name he relayed. Its very sound couldn't translate well enough any known language. Still, I asked, and Herod told me the tale of the damned thing. Nekrakhon. Bless you. Nekrakhon, the great miscreation, is not of the worlds we know to be the realm of the Almighty One. Beyond what can be seen, there is another existence, terrifying beyond our deepest fears. I was persistent in my inquisition about what he had heard of this thing. He appeared more calm when he was recounting a trip he had taken out west, stating, I had been helping in an excavation of the lands the Navajo once occupied. We came across a cave network leading into a crevice where we found a mesmerizing crystal. It was blue, pointed as a diamond on all ends with a smooth surface. Maybe it was upon gazing into that very object that made me have terrible visions. After we emerged from those caves, some armed men greeted us and had the object confiscated, saying it belonged to a man named Robert Lloyd, who owned the land. I did not argue, but after having visions of what this thing is, and where it came from, I feel an urge to find another. There are others that I know to be a fact after the preliminary research I conducted. All over the earth they were placed there long ago. When I had gone to bed that evening, I had the most terrifying dream, a series of beastly images, too terrible to recount, but they can at least put your curiosity at bay. Herod then turned to look at me in the eye. You don't have to have this knowledge control your life, as it has done mine. I was foolish, maybe even starving for clarity. I asked what this thing was, and where it came from. John straightened his back and clung to the armrest on his chair, asking, You dare know what I have seen? I nodded, telling him I was indeed a man of high intellect, and able to take on truths bigger than what society ordains to be facts. Herod nodded his head, but had his eyes pitied me, knowing I too may succumb to some madness after hearing this recollection. Herod then began his revelation. Before our universe came into formation, there was a dying universe dominated by the great races of powerful entities hell-bent on destroying one another. There were Nekrakhon, a race of slimy black masses, able to take on a mass of different forms, but always bearing a sea of eyes. Oh my God, the eyes. And they all have sharp teeth around their irises. Oh, it's terrible! I calmed him down and then realized it would be wise to take this down, hoping that alone would keep his composure. Herod continued. Yes, the Nekrakhon were a race of sentient gods whose abilities could create universes and other cosmic features, such as holes with gravitational poles strong enough to rip away at stars, and other space matter, even time and consciousness. Oh, but these powers angered the Hartman Commandu. Like us, they were created by their forebears, but as I once felt, they dreamed of controlling their own destinies. The Commandu children inherited civilizations that transcended space and time to a level where they could influence other life forms. However, they were malicious in everything they encountered, exterminating whole planets of living organisms only to use their corpses to create new life forms. known as Gergal, who acted as slaves, constructing their vast networks of cosmic railways. I only say railway because it's the best way I can rationalize their travel. Regardless, the Gergal became resentful and interceded to the Nekroshargoth, who also became irate with the Commandu race and its desire to exterminate. Imagine if we befell satanic influences and our own former slaves interceded to Christ to aid them in their struggle. Could our cannons defeat an army of angels? Perhaps not, but only if we could create some horrid weapon. Herod stopped, then widened his eyes. Thanks be to God we don't have the ability to produce the beast whose wretched things conjured up. Herod stopped and grabbed one of the blank sheets from my stack to start sketching an image. I watched with intense anticipation, already marred by the strange descriptions he had already relayed. He hovered over, telling me he only wanted me to see once he was done speaking about it. As he hovered over his illustration, he continued muttering, but occasionally raising his voice. The Herkot Commandu were so advanced beyond measure, they collected their best scientists and high priests to plan a devious act to lure all of their slaves to false starvation. Promising a chance to rise above their status, they lured them to a cosmos where a massive hole hid in plain sight. They sent them, knowing they could not escape the gravity, which sucked all of them inside. It's insurmountable to imagine the numerical figures, but if I could imagine 1,000 Earths with our current population, that's how many would have died. Out of pure rage, the Nekroshargoth aimed to destroy their creation. Herod then laid his hands atop the hidden drawing and raised his voice. It was a trap laid atop another trap, as those deviant Commandu beings then extracted the corpses of all those Gergal and formed them into one horrifying, ghastly monstrosity. He lifted up the drawing to reveal the beast. Nekrakhon! I was unable to make any thoughts upon gazing at this demented image. However, it didn't shock me, as I determined Herod was taking notions of classic demonic images. But on second glance and hearing more, it was starting to sound more frightening. Herod laid down the illustration, but never removed his eyes from the image. As he continued, I dread the day we developed a weapon powerful enough to destroy ourselves. For the Commandu, indeed, had won as such. To the fright of the Nekroshargoth, this beast emerged from the black hole, flinging out its 4 arms at once, and crawling out on its back hind legs to reveal the head of one Gergal skull. With the sharpest teeth imaginable, it let out a roar so hideously loud it made the heads of the Commandu explode, giving birth to the Nekrokinder, who attended their father, who begged them to feast on the bodies of their host. The Commandu were now extinct, and the Nekroshargoth feared the beast was too powerful for them to control, so they banished it, when they too chose to destroy their own universe. Nekrakhon had arrived into our universe when the Archangels and the Almighty One's loyal soldiers, the Necroangeli, were at war. The Necroangeli were a beastly race of fearless monsters that were created by the Almighty One to fight off the dark forces from the Nekroshargoth realm. When the Archangels ordered their extermination, only 5 survived the conflict, and one named Oletiao had summoned Nekrakhon's aid. Oletiao was young when his father was cast into the eternal pit of the void, and his mother was turned into stone. It was a fearsome youth whose sharp teeth and demonic essence gave it the motive to swear vengeance to the Archangels. When Oletiao had traveled to the outer edge of the universe, it discovered Nekrakhon, and together they vowed to gain a stronghold on the Archangel's conquest, Mu, known to us as the planet Earth. It was here that Oletiao and Nekrakhon dominated the ancient peoples, instilling in them the fear of an otherworldly presence, as well as the cultural foundations of what the Christians refer to as the heathenistic ethnic groups. Nekrakhon ruled over the ancient South American people and empowered them to build great cities named after the damned ones of Yith, with horrific names such as Piten in Juachtu Ucatempalo, and the most dreaded of all, Uaxcuctun. The people held sacrifices and wars in its honor, while Latiao ruled in the eastern lands as Jetsakon. Nekrakhon ferociously ruled with great zeal over the Americas, for it was the will of Nekrakhon that blood was to be the way of the land. For the land demands it, and nothing will be wasted to keep it alive. But in the end of days, the blood will cease, and Nekrakhon will once again and rule with the humans as its slaves, and Latiao will reign above as the sole ruler of Mu. Herod nearly collapsed where he sat, and grabbed a hold of his shoulder to stay upright. He looked at me with fierce conviction and said, "The secrets are in the very past. Our European ancestors ravaged these lands, perhaps under the influence of these monsters. The knowledge of the past is lost, but in those ancient cities, ruins buried under overgrowth, I will find the evidence I need." I asked what he was hoping to accomplish with gaining such proof, to which he replied, "I had spent years insulting the Almighty One, and now I can only remedy the wounds I inflicted by relaying the truth of what we such prospects instilled my heart with fear." Herod stared at me with utter conviction that these truths were undeniable. Herod assured me that this time was near, for as the 20th century continues, humanity will once again fall into the selfish hands of the archangels. The Son of the Almighty One will be purged, and evil will consume the land again. Such a claim was too confusing, but Herod said in a stone-faced, monotone voice, "It's the will that the humans shall never excel, and it's the will of the universe they shall never extend their financial motivated acts beyond this blue hell, for like the archangels, they are bitter race, for like Lucifer, they are damned with the faults of the archangels. They were created by them, created in their image and likeness, and when Nekrakhon is once more summoned, the humans will be subdued, and we shall suffer the same fate as Hertoth Kamandu." After that moment, neither of us ever spoke to each other ever again. I left the room in disbelief, but unable to easily refute what he had stated. I went that evening to a nearby hotel to try and seek out some colleagues. Many I had confronted were puzzled by the night's events, but I dare not tell them what he had relayed to me that evening. I made a pact with myself to never repeat what had been discussed to any living person. Yet the very curse of this beast would haunt me in my years I attempted to face the world as a living human being. In the years that followed, I found myself wanting to leave the scientific lectures, as well as religious congregations. My ethos was in flux, and my head was packed with these radical ideas that left me in utter horror. I convinced myself for a while that while these claims were untrue, as I only heard them from one man, who by now was a social outcast. Then came the fateful year of 1903, almost 10 years since my unfortunate encounter with Dr. Herod. A letter was slid from under my front door. When I went to look, there was no messenger in sight. Inside was a note from Dr. James Howell, a colleague of mine from Yale. "Mr. Sanders, I wish to inform you that I will be engaging in an archaeological expedition to the South American continent with Dr. John Herod. His questionable reputation has been redeemed by his accurate maps of the resting location of the city of Uxkatu. I wish to let you know, since you had mentioned an association with Dr. Herod, and felt it was appropriate that you were informed. You may wish to join us, for we leave on the 24th of August on the steamship Surabaya. Dr. James Howell." I threw the letter out. My heart thumped as I remembered that his chant that Nekrakhon is near. The howling winds of the late summer storm left at the window, envisioning the most terrifying beast the sane mind could conjure up. Then in the clouds, I saw a flash of lightning strike against a cloud that appeared like a beast with a wide grin. I shut the blinds and proceeded to utter the Lord's Prayer. Only then did a calm overcome my state, as I rediscovered a bottle of rye my alcoholic colleague left behind. As anyone will tell you at Miskatonic, I succumbed to the bottle. It was the only way I was able to purge my mind of any terrible thoughts. I was in a state of bliss. Until the letters arrived. Mr. Sanders, I am a cohort of Dr. Howell. We have been receiving some distressing letters from the Brazilian government that he and Dr. Herod have gone missing. I felt I should inform you. I tore up that letter and almost everyone that arrived at that point. 4 months later, I received a letter from Nuremberg. It was from Dr. Herod. My dear friend Arnold, I can no longer claim to be the man I once was. I saw it, and I can't get it out of my subconscious. I left Dr. Howell to the terror as the great shadow emerged from the lower depths. I ran and ran until I came across a team of men building a railroad some 100 miles away. I tried to keep my sanity, but was unable to face the public without screaming of its presence. I am horrifically in shambles. I had to hide in baggage stores on railway carriages and ship cargo holds. I found myself in Rotterdam, where I tried to immerse myself with the mundane, but I couldn't face the crowds. I checked myself into the Hellstein Institution here in Nuremberg. The letter you are reading was smuggled out by a guard named Robert, who was kind to me. I know who he really is, but he didn't have to explain to me. He will be coming to see you soon. I myself have found solace amidst the screams and cackles of my fellow inmates. I shall die here if I don't take my own life with my own hands. Nekrakhon is here. He will stand before the dark forces and rally them on as he stands above with his skull-like head, his 4 sharp-toothed hands, and his razor-tipped tail. Even as I write, I can still hear that hideous roar. It was worse than the roar of a lion or a tiger, and I know it's very real. Please, hear me. Do not go to Uxkatum. Do not say its name. And do not... The letter was discontinued from that point. I laid it down and placed a bottle on top of it. I probably shouldn't have persisted to drink after reading that letter, for now even drinking is useless. When Robert finally came, I knew I was destined to be taught in a state of sane fear. I received a cable that he was traveling at breakneck speed across the United States via Asia. Each ensuing cable of the next point of departure felt like another nail in my coffin. The day I received news he had arrived in Chicago, I resolved to leave, and he had collected a few days' worth of clothing for a quick trip. Only when I opened the door did I finally come face to face with this man, or should I even refer to him as such? He stood about 6 feet 5 inches, and he had uniformly gaunt proportions. His eyes were piercing blue, nor did he ever blink. His voice was calm, but disturbingly monotone. The dark iris of his eyes were portals into madness. He never took his eyes off me, and he stood upright with his long skeleton-like fingers resting on my kneecaps. When I reached for my bottle, he asked me if I was afraid, and barked back claiming I wished to know nothing more of Dr. Herod, and that I had regretted my association with him. I wished never to hear of Nekrakhon ever again, and he yelled voraciously at him to stop pestering me and allow me to continue my life as though everything was mundane as it was once before. Robert stood up and hovered over me like a massive skyscraper. He told me to fear what I was told to be feared, and he laid his terrifyingly large hand over my head and said, "Nekrakhon isn't as forgiving as I am." He then reached from his pocket a shining diamond blue object. I knew this to be the damned object that drove Herod to insanity. He grabbed my head and slammed my face onto its surface. Only then did I see the things that Herod had seen, the horrid aberrations and monstrosities that lurk beyond the atmospheric sanctity of our planet and beyond the infinite. How minuscule we truly are, and our daily anxieties, and fears are insignificant when compared to the vast madness occupying space and time. Perhaps I am going insane, and forever I will be haunted by these occurrences. May Nekrakhon forgive me, for now I hold vigil to its presence, with a shrine properly dedicated to its honor, pledging that I may never see its face again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was truly a disturbing and terrifying tale. But is it believable? Could there be another theory about how the universe and the Earth we are currently living on was created? Could this be true, or is it just another thing of fiction that the History Channel often puts on? You be the judge. And like everything else in life, I must depart. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's episode of Eerie Hour with Eric. I know it was a long one, so those of you that are still with me, thank you so much for doing so. Thank you so much to my two special guests, and thank you so much to my ever faithful cameraman for filming this episode. And remember, folks, dreams can become reality, but at the same time, dreams can become nightmares. But can nightmares become reality? You be sure to like my Facebook page, Eerie Hour with Eric, where you'll get updates about future episodes, as well as content of an eerie nature. Farewell for now, folks, and tune in next week, if you dare.